Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our discussions and readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. This is a set of introductory comments to the Calamus section. We have just finished the Children of Adam section, and we now turn to the Calamus section, a collection of some 39 of the most remarkable poems that you will ever read. Now, they are also some of the most controversial poems of Leaves of Grass, so we're going to have to talk about that. Now, just to begin, because I want to be able to, very quickly go through all of those 39 poems in the same way that we've already worked through all of the other poems, beginning with the epigraph and then through the inscriptions poems, Song of Myself, as well as, of course, as we said, Children of Adam. Let's go through some basic assumptions really quickly. Now, the first assumption, and I hope that it is a legitimate one for most of you, is the LearnStrong.net playlist. Now, go to that site, scroll down the left-hand side, see our link there for Talks with Walt, and take a look at our playlist. My hope is that you have watched all of our previous lectures, because as we have said, one of the foundational arguments that we make in our conversations is that we are the stories we tell. We're the stories that we decide to retell. Of course, we're the stories that we decide to either accept or to reject. And of course, we're going to make the argument that before we decide to accept or reject certain stories like Leaves of Grass, we obviously want to make sure that we've read it closely and understood it. Everything that we're going to do in this set of conversations regarding the Calamus section, just like we've done with all the previous different lectures, is built around our idea of the learning theory, that notion that we're always looking to connect or relate new information to old information in meaningful ways. As we've often said, the new is the new. The N-E-W is the K-N-E-W. Now, it's significant that I say this now, because by the time, if you've just started reading with me and you've worked all the way up to the Calamus section, you've put together a pretty serious amount of reading and, I hope, annotation of the text that you have in front of you. And to that degree now, you really are ready to read the Calamus section in ways that normally you might not be able to read so well. We're going to obviously draw on that prior information. For example, we will look at any of the poems in the Calamus section and ask, how does this relate to anything we've read earlier? For example, in like Song of Myself, or in one of the Children of Adam poems, or in Starting from Pomenock, or any number of other poems that we've already covered. Now, our annotation approach is critical, so let's review it quickly. We always will ask about any one of the poems of the 39 that we're looking at to read at 3 levels. We're always going to ask 3 guiding questions. At level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? And at level 3, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? Now, at level 1, we're only asking about summarizing. At level 2A, we will divide the second level into 2 parts. At 2A, themes and messages. And at 2B, this is the rhetorical kind of questions, the literary techniques. Not what Whitman says, but how Whitman says it. That will be significant for us in every one of the poems that we will study. Finally, at level 3, how can I relate to this information in meaningful ways? At 3A, we'll ask, how can I relate this information in other texts that I'm familiar with? Now again, of course, we'll begin, obviously, with our study of Leaves of Grass. And I'm going to fight, as I said to you in Children of Adam, I am going to fight that temptation in every single line of every one of the 39 poems of Calamus to point out the ways in which we have heard these echoes before. I told you guys before, I really do believe you have to know your Whitman to read your T.S. Eliot well. And it's that opening lines, remember, of Bert Norton, as we've given full explication at LearnStrong.net. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose? Disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. This echoing is something I think Eliot learned from Whitman, and we see it all the way through. It's a phenomenal thing. And then finally, and most importantly, at 3B, we'll ask, how can I personally relate to the information that I'm working with? And I hope that if you've been with me for all the lectures to this point, that you feel like you are growing and you are improving as a reader at the personal level. Now, we're always asking about what we will call our big 5. Namely, about any one of these texts, we'll ask, what does this text say about epistemology and what we can know? We'll work again with the position of the absolutist position. I'm right, you're wrong, I know I'm absolutely right. So there's a problem, obviously, at times with that epistemological position. There's this complete opposite, the relativist position. There is no truth. There are no absolutes, which, unfortunately, the performative contradiction, right, starts to sound like an absolute or a truth, and to that degree, the performative contradiction kind of falls on itself. Right? There is that centering position, and I'm going to argue that in the American mind, In large measure, along with the help of people like Emily Dickinson and Thoreau and Emerson, I think Whitman was the great instantiator of what we call in 303 the fallibilist position. Epistemologically, it's simple. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. That I could be wrong is, of course, foundationally what the scientific method should be, right? Borrowing from the Enlightenment. And we're going to look to see epistemologically what these texts have to say. Our second of the big five is ontology. Who you are. Who am I? That question is foundational, I think, to reading Leaves of Grass, as we saw in our study of, for example, Song of Myself. The third and the fourth go together of our big five. Psychology, the study of the individual minds, motivations for actions, the way we deal with anxieties and fears and the like. And then sociology, the study of the group itself and the ways in which we all relate together. Again, to remind you, Whitman is so interested in the tension that is, of course, a fundamental American tension. We'll think about John Stuart Mill's On Liberty as a classic example statement of this. That on the one hand, we are a bunch of individuals wanting to claim our individuality. Don't tell me what to do, the Declaration of Independence. And yet at the same time, we celebrate the idea of unity and some harmony or hegemony, politically speaking. We're all kind of in this together. The tension between the two is, of course, always present in our study of Whitman. And then finally, of our big five, the question of pain, suffering, the theodicy question. Why is it that bad things have to happen? And how can I somehow learn to no longer ask when something bad happens, why did this happen to me? But rather learn to ask, why did this happen for me? I think Whitman, more than any other American writer, with the maybe exception of Emily Dickinson herself, Whitman's always asking us to think about this question, and we're going to look at it over and over again. Now we'll also talk about our five P's, or five perspectives on Whitman. We're going to look at Whitman always in our study of Leaves of Grass. Whitman is person. He had a life, a biography, and it's sometimes convoluted and questionable and difficult. We're obviously going to play that game in the Calamus section because they are such controversial poems in regards to Whitman's own biography. We're going to look at Whitman as a poet. Obviously, he saw himself as a great singer of songs, so we're going to see the ways in which he'll call and draw on the Homeric tradition, the Virgilian tradition, and all the other poetic traditions that precede him. He was also, we'll look at Whitman as pedagogue, the third of our P's. Whitman was a teacher, and I've made the argument that I think the only way to actually read Leaves of Grass is through the prism of Whitman as a teacher. He was a successful teacher for a while, failed teacher other times. I think he never lost his passion, though, for education. And we go back to a passage like passage 46 and 47 of Song of Myself to render the pedagogic view of Whitman as being crucial. We're going to see a lot of that in the Calamus section as well. Now, it goes without saying that the fourth P has got to be Whitman as politician, especially his deep and abiding love of democracy. He will use Calamus as a symbol of democracy in the same way that we saw it in Song of Myself, passage 6, something we'll get to as a reminder here in a second. And then finally, and I think so important, we have to see Whitman as philosopher. That is to say, the idea of everything he learned, from Socrates, subsumed up through his love and study of Emerson, especially listening to the Emerson presentations and lectures. I think it's so critical for us to understand that Whitman was always asking the great philosophic questions that would really matter to him and obviously to his readers of his own day, both in America and outside of America, and obviously, I would argue, today. Now, my hope is that you have your own copy of Leaves of Grass, the Deathbed Edition. My hope is that you're annotating it as you go. Make it your own. Own that text. My hope is that you're doing your own reading, and then after you do your own study, come to my study here with you to try and help you provide a bit of more guidance to help you grow in your study. Now let's go to some background information quickly. I mentioned that Calamus, of course, is understood to be a great symbol. It is, of course, grass itself. I'm just going to go to Norton's, as we always have done in our previous lectures, to hear what Norton's has to say, introducing us to the Calamus section. Of all the groups in Leaves of Grass, the Calamus poems, first appearing in the text in 1860, possessed the closest autonomy held together by a sentiment of manly attachment. Adhesiveness was the term that Walt Whitman borrowed from phrenology, which some readers find more intimate and compelling than that of Children of Adam. Well, I'll let you debate a line like that. Their beginning may be summarized in a manuscript cluster of 12 poems, out of sequence in their present position, which appear originally to have been intended for a commemorative notebook of like pen and ink and marked by Roman numerals. These poems reveal a story of attachment and renunciation whose symbol at first was not calamus, but live oak with moss. For the benefit of his English editor, Rossetti, Walt Whitman defined his symbol as follows. Now this is Whitman commenting on why calamus. Quote, "Calamus is a common word here. It's very large, an aromatic grass or rush, growing about water ponds in the valleys. Spears about 3 feet high." We definitely Google image this if you're unfamiliar so you can see it. Often called sweet flag, okay, grows all over the northern and middle states. The rechichechi, or ethereal sense of the term, as used in my book, arises probably from the actual calamus presenting the biggest and hardest kind of spears of grass and their fresh, aquatic, pungent bouquet, end quote. That the symbol also, now back to Norton's, possessed a specific sexual significance is apparent from its use 5 years earlier in Song of Myself, passage 24. You'll maybe remember this line, "Root of washed sweet flag, timorous pond snipe, nest of guarded duplicate eggs, it shall be you." The famous "it shall be you" passage, we've completely explicated that whole passage of 24, Song of Myself. You can go back and take a look at it if you need to. Now, to John Addington Symonds, who inquired whether the calamus sentiment was homoerotic, Whitman gave an emphatic denial, alleging his normal sexuality. And again, Whitman is poet. This is always one of those things that becomes a debate among Whitman scholars. We ourselves will be less interested in that debate and more interested in just what Whitman has to say in the poems themselves. Both in Democratic Vistas and in his 76 preface to Leaves of Grass, Whitman was at pains to insist that the meaning of calamus resides mainly in its political significance. For example, quote, "It is the development, identification, and general prevalence of that furtive companionship, comradeship, the adhesive love, at least rivaling the amative love hitherto possessing imaginative literature, if not going beyond it, that I look for the counterbalance and offset of our materialistic and vulgar American democracy, and for the spiritualization thereof," end quote. This is an important line because, of course, it speaks to what Whitman himself believes the calamus poems are trying to pull off. However, back to Norton's now, mistaken such a hope, there is no question that for the poet, the calamus sentiment possessed a power both tragic and idealistic, from whose inner turmoil was to emerge compassion, sympathy, and balance. And then to finish, through the remaining 6 editions of Leaves of Grass, this group of poems retained its identity with surprisingly little change. The 45 poems of 1860 were reduced in 1867 to 42, with 3 poems rejected. In 1871, 1 poem was added, and 4 were transferred to Passage to India, to make a total of 39, which is the number retained for the final arrangement of 1881. So, as we now turn to our study of the calamus section, I want to take you back, just for a few moments, to Song of Myself. I think these lines help us in our reading to try and remind ourselves of the beauty, the power of Leaves of Grass. Let's just remind ourselves, if we could, of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. You'll maybe remember this, starting in passage 4. He says it this way: "These come to me days and nights, and go from me again, but they are not the me myself. Apart from the pulling and hauling stands what I am, stands amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, or bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looking with side-curved head curious what will come next, both in and out of the game, and watching and wondering at it. Backward, I see my own days where I sweated through fog with linguists and contenders. I have no mockings or arguments. I witness and wait. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. Loaf with me on the grass. Loose the stop from your throat. Not words, not music or rhyme I want, not custom or lecture, not even the best. Only the lull. I like the hum of your valved voice." Now this valved voice will be, of course, part of the calamus beauty, that we might say, right? I mind how once we lay with such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me and parted the shirt from my bosom bone and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart and reached till you felt my beard and reached till you held my feet. Swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers, and that a Celsian of the creation is love, and limitless are leaves stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the warm fence, heaped stones, elder, mullein, and pokeweed. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I did not know what it is any more than he. I guess it must be the flag of my disposition out of hopeful green stuff woven. Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer, designately dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners that we may say and remark and say, whose? Or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic. And it means sprouting aloud in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white. Canuck, Tuckahoe, Congressman, Cuff. I give them the same. I receive them the same. And now it seems to me the beautiful uncut hair of graves. Tenderly I will use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men. It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. And here you are their mother's laps. This grass is very dark to be from the white hairs of old mothers, darker than the colorless beards of old men, dark to come from under the faint red roofs of mouths. Oh, I perceive after all so many uttering tongues, and I perceive they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about the old men and mothers, and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men, and what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Let's turn to the Calamus section. Let's be blown away by Whitman's beautiful voice. Right? And by this point, you've obviously heard it a lot. Let's appreciate the echoes from the earlier sets of lines. You'll come back to the lines that I just read, and let's enjoy the music in the grass. And let's turn now to In Paths Untrodden. I wish you the best of luck in your study of Calamus. Thank you.